Welcome to the microbiology video introducing the Virtual Unknown software. This software has a steep learning curve based on three main factors. First, the lab manual is written in a college-level language which sometimes requires extensive vocabulary and reading skills to decode. Students usually find they need to read the labs more slowly and carefully than they read other materials. Second, directions are placed into paragraphs which may include several steps. Research has shown that normal working memory can only hold up to 7 bits of information at a time. Therefore, trying to retain the lab information at the same time you are absorbing TV sounds, supervising children's activities, and making dinner most likely is not going to lead to your success. When doing these labs, you'll find it far less frustrating and much faster to work on them when you can focus without distraction. If you were taking this class in a face-to-face environment, you would naturally be able to focus because the distractions would not be in the lab with you. My most successful students online are those who can carve out some quiet time to focus on lab work and only lab work. Now, for those of you thinking, I don't have that kind of time, I do understand. I've been in your shoes, really. I started work on my master's at the UND Med School when my youngest son was 16 days old, my oldest son was 2, and my husband was gone up to 200 days a year overseas with the Air Force. If you're in a situation like that, forcing yourself to find the time to focus will be the best thing you can do to help you succeed in school. Finally, students struggle with the software because they try to rush to the questions without reading the directions, and then they end up frustrated. Still, with all of what I've just told you, students at the end of the class find they have learned a tremendous amount of microbiology doing these labs, and that's why I keep them in there. Doing these labs are like working yourself up to running a 10K if you've never run before. It may sometimes be frustrating, it may sometimes give you a headache, but when you reach the end and you look back on how much you've learned, you really will be able to see how far you've come. Now let's take a look at a few issues that come up when starting to work through the labs. First, make sure you're using the 2012 version of the program. The 2003 version is no longer acceptable. The 2012 lab setup looks like the right of the screen there. Make sure yours looks like that, and the manual has the 2012 copyright up in the upper left-hand corner. Next, check off every step of every paragraph as you complete it. Do not skip any steps. I can't emphasize that enough. If you skip steps, you will become lost. These lab exercises all build on one another, and skipping step in lab number 1 will leave you lost and confused in lab number 2, and so on. If we look at the lab ourselves, if we look at this lab here, this is from the manual. If you were to skip all of this intro information and jump right to number 1, which is what people who are in a rush tend to do, you would miss all this information that tells you how to find help. This tells you, when you go to the help menu, you can ask it to show you how to do something. So let's say you get to the spot where you need to run some kind of test and you don't know how to do it. You did it back in lab number 1, but now you don't remember. You can go to show me how to, and it's going to show you how to do that. Also, if you didn't do the tutorial, it says here in step number 1, work through the quick start tutorial. If you skip that because you didn't have time, bad idea. You really need to do that, because if you don't do the tutorial, you're going to have to guess at a lot of things the tutorial would tell you how to do, and it's just a lot faster to do everything it tells you to do than to skip it and then try to figure it out yourself. Skipping things and figuring out how to do them, you're trying to figure out how to do them yourself later, is the number 1 cause of frustration in this lab. If you do every step it tells you to do, you'll be okay. So here we can do the quick start tutorial again. If you didn't do it or you rushed through it, I would really highly suggest that. As you go through the lab, it's going to show you screenshots of everything you need to do. Make sure you look at those, and if there's anything you don't understand, stop the lab, email me, call me, and get help. Because if you just skip a step and say, I don't have time to figure this out, I'm just going to skip and do what I can, when we get to the next lab, you're really going to be hurting really bad. So make sure you figure out how to do every step, because lab number 1, you need all that information to do lab number 2. By the time you get to lab number 23, 24, if you've just been rushing through, you're not going to be able to do it. You've got to do every lab. They're cumulative. Make sure you know what you're doing. A couple of other things I want to point out. I'm not going to go through the whole lab because I want you to get the practice. And some of these things, this is the second take of this video, so some of this stuff's already up on the screen because the first one I lost sound. So as you go through, make sure you do every step. So you'll note that there's nothing shown initially in the unknown box. Mine says lab 1 because I already did that in the last take of this video. you would have to select an unknown before any work can begin. Couple things to keep in mind. Do every step. I know I'm jumping around. I've done this before. Make sure you check every step. Don't skip any steps. Couple of things that confuse people sometimes. When it tells you to pick a new unknown, when you enter a label, says lab 1, I'm going to do lab 2 because I already have a lab 1 up there. You can name it whatever you want as long as there's no spaces. I'll show you where the lab name is going to come in and why that's important here in a second. Auto inoculation, only use that if you the directions say to. Once you get to the unknown labs, then you can use auto inoculation too. That's fine. Okay. It's going to give you a case study. Everybody's going to get a different case study. The last take I did of this, it was case study number 111. Now it's case study 2. You can't use your friend's labs because what you're trying to do is get the right answer for what the computer is giving you. No, two students aren't necessarily going to have the same answer because the computer has a wide variety of unknowns it can give you. So I'll show you what I'm going to grade here in a minute. Okay, so it's going to give us a case study, so we're going to read through the case study. This is just a bit of piece of information. It's just one piece of the puzzle. We're going to get lots of pieces here. Okay, then it's going to give us a gram stain. Now, what your lab says to do is to read the case study. See, this is case number 160. So you have to do your own work. Read the case study. Review the gram stain. This says, try to exit the gram stain image without making any suggestions. Okay, it's going to give me an error message. And then you would write that in there. What message did you receive? Please select a result. Some of these answers, if you don't have the right thing, I'm going to know that you did it wrong. Let's say you had messed up and you already knew, oh, these are pink rods, so I know that they're gram-negative rods. Okay, they are gram-negative rods, but I'm going to put gram-positive rods just because I want you to see the error message. Okay, it tells you if you do something wrong. If it doesn't tell you did it wrong, you can assume you did it right. However, we'll check that here in a minute. You selected the correct in classification. It's going to try to teach you. Okay, it says an error has been recorded on the lab report. This session will now continue with the correct classification. So it's going to correct it for you. Okay, it's going to do gram-negative for you. Okay, once you go through gram stain, it's going to tell you to collect other media. And again, I'm skipping some steps here. Make sure you don't skip those because I don't want this video to be too long. There's lots of different choices of media up here. When you get to the point of doing later labs, you need to know how to use these media, which means if you start skipping steps in your early labs because you're in a rush, you're going to get really stuck. Don't do that. Okay, so I picked a media, phenol red glucose broth. It says to type in the title PR glucose. Again, doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it whatever you want as long as you know what it is. Okay, then it gives me the media. One of the things it showed you in the tutorial, and is going to have you practice here, is inoculating your media. You're going to use the Bunsen burner. You're going to take off the caps. You're going to, don't try to guess at that. As I'm going through that, don't use what I'm saying as your process. You have to go through the tutorial because it's going to tell you how to do it. But it's going to be mimicking what you would do in a real lab. The benefit to doing it online is this little button right here. Instead of waiting 24 hours, you can pick new day, which means that if you're taking this online, you can do a whole lot more tests and learn a whole lot more information about media than you could by taking it in the classroom. When I take it in the classroom, or when I teach it in the classroom, we can't use nearly as much a variety as media and bacteria as we can here in the virtual lab. You will be doing some real media, and that's what your lab kits will contain, but you're going to do this virtual stuff first to help you figure it out. Alright, as you go through, it's going to tell you to do some tests. Make sure you go through and do every single step. This is going to be about the Bunsen burners. Make sure that you do that step. Something I do want to point out is your lab report. When you view your lab report, remember I made a mistake on the gram stain. It corrected it for me. Remember, I said it was positive. It said it was negative. Now, sometimes, it doesn't have it on this one, but when you do a mistake, like if you left the Bunsen burner or something on there, it would say that in red. It would say, burner was left on overnight. If you start making a whole bunch of those mistakes, you will start to lose points. So make sure that you do everything correctly. excuse me, something I do want to point out. It does track your login information, which means that you have to do your own. You cannot submit somebody else's. Like I said, you don't have to put in a section number or lab number. This is where, when I labeled it, remember I said I already had a lab 1, so I'm going to label it lab 2. This is where that comes up. That's for your own use to keep track of your labs, and so that you can keep track when you submit them, when you turn them in to me, because you're going to turn in this PDF file and you can't change that. Once we get to unknowns, and we'll talk about this more when we get to unknowns, this becomes important. How to determine this identification information, I have a PDF file in the document sharing part of the class. Whenever you get to a lab that says how to identify unknowns, make sure you look at that until you're familiar with it, because the computer is going to assign you an unknown. It might be E. coli, might be any of these 124 that it has in the program, 53 plus 71. And then you're going to have to do the test to identify it. And that, I don't want to get too much into that right now because it's going to be completely overwhelming when you're just starting. But as we go through and we do those labs, then we'll get more into that, and I'll give you some help when we get there. So the lab report says everything you did in the lab. This is just as important when you turn in your assignment. Turning in this lab report and having it complete and correct is just as important as answering these questions, because doing the lab report shows me exactly what you did when you were doing the lab, whereas these questions you could get from somebody else. I wouldn't know. But doing the lab report, the PDF, really shows me that you did the work. So that's crucial. So as you go through each lab, it's going to tell you what to do. Here, see, it says use the skills learned in the tutorial. If you didn't do that and you skip it, you're going to be really sorry. So it goes through and it has you do some more information, answering some questions. Make sure you do every step. Again, if you get stuck on a step, make sure you call me during my office hours. Make sure you email me, or you will get stuck. And I do not want you to get stuck. I do not want you frustrated. But this is a more advanced type of lab. It's a more independent type of lab than if you took anatomy with me and you did the Physio EX labs. Those were very guided and they told you exactly what to do and you couldn't really make any mistakes. This is much more independent. You're getting more advanced. Microbiology is one of the most advanced lab sciences that we offer in biology. It requires the most independent thinking. So it's very important that if you don't understand, you get help rather than just skipping it and thinking, I'll just get through this one and do the next one. You won't be able to do the next one if you don't understand this one. You have to understand lab number 1 to do lab number 2. You have to understand both lab number 1 and number 2 to do lab number 3, all the way up to lab number, whatever the highest is, 27, 28, 29, somewhere up there. You can't skip steps. I can't emphasize that enough. And I really, really want to make sure that you understand that I do have my phone office hours. They are listed in the syllabus. And if you get stuck, please, please call me. I can't help you unless you ask for help. I won't know. So as you go through this, I don't want you to get scared and I don't want you to get frustrated thinking I'm making, a big deal of how difficult this is. It's just that students get hit with this lab in lab number 1 and it's different than anything they've seen, but I guarantee if you go through each step and you take it slow and you focus, by lab number 20s, in the 20s, you're going to be a pro. And by the end of the class, people that really take the time and really do every step really like these labs. But the people that don't get very, very frustrated. So if you need to decide which path you're going to take. Are you going to go slow and learn it, or are you going to go fast and get frustrated? I can't make that choice for you. You have to make that choice. But please know that I'm here to help you if you need it.